afternoon, everybody. How are you? Hope your day has gone really well. Slightly different format. I think if we can go for questions and or reflections to spur on the conversation this afternoon. The understanding was that this is looking at community ownership and the strength of organisations anchored in place and helping to deliver local needs, reflecting on COVID-19 and the community recovery in both urban and rural areas. I suppose one of the things that we would be focused on with Development Trust Association are those community anchor organisations that have shown the power of community resilience and have shown the ability to be able to answer community need in such a striking, quick, organised way. But I suppose the question is, where do we go from here, and what have we learned from that importance of community ownership and being in place in our communities, and what does place actually mean? Someone had commented to me a few weeks ago that the communities that we work with are like the small boats reaching the beach at Dunkirk. The bigger boats found it harder to turn and found it harder to get into the shallower waters. It was the wee boats, the communities, that were able to actually hit where the need was. And I would just like to see if that prompted any questions with anyone, anything that I've said. Roy, are you happy to open up if anybody has any questions? I think you're on mute.
Now, rather than waiting to finish, I'm quite happy to handle that if they can let me know who they are in that chat box and make themselves available through the share your audio and video. Or would you like a question now, Sophie? Because it's only you. I don't have to move around the stage. Therefore, it might be an advantage. If you're comfortable to take questions, I'm quite happy to pose one. Yeah?
Yeah, Brian's saying that he has an observation.
No problem at all. Brian, bringing you on.
Hi there. How are you doing? I think that's it now.
Hi, Brian.
I
welcome,
work
Brian,
for Scottish Enterprise, and interestingly, my loyal split today. How are you doing? I've just come off a session that Cooperative Development Scotland, Plonket, and Community Share Scotland ran this morning, looking at setting up community businesses and understanding kind of the opportunities there, but very much, I suppose, an observation again around the resilience of community assets and community hubs during COVID, that they very much played a vital role in terms of, again, keeping communities alive, providing, as I say, that kind of providing meeting space and providing a kind of social connection that I think has been vital for people through this. Interestingly, we heard a particular community shop that had just set up and literally opened 2 weeks before COVID hit. And instead of letting things get to them, they very much kind of recognised there was still an opportunity for them to step in and provide a valuable community, I suppose, asset and offer kind of deliveries within the local community. So it was quite endearing to hear of their journey and ultimately how they've been able to quickly respond, as you've said, to the needs of their local residents.
Thanks very much for that, Brian. Sophie, would you get something to respond to that? That observation? Sophie, we'll bring Sophie in.
Hello.
Hi, Sophie.
Sorry, I just struggling a bit with the technology this morning.
That's okay.
No, I don't. I think I just echo what everyone else has said. I don't have anything.
Okay, right, okay. I understand. What you've done is you've hit the share your audio and video panel, so it makes it look as if you're coming in with a question. That's no problem.
Oh, right. Okay, sorry.
Okay, that was an excellent a show you put on this morning, Sophie. Well done.
Thank you.
Okay, Lena?
I suppose the question that I would ask following what Brian just said there, what makes it important for communities. What does place mean with regards to communities? What makes them the bodies that are best placed to answer community need? And the second part of that I suppose I would be trying to pose to people, get them to reflect on, would be the resilience effort was one thing, the recovery may be something completely different. And does anyone have any observations with regard to how we look differently, reflect on the resilience effort from communities in place, and look at how we recover, and what are the kind of tools that we're going to need to do that, and what messages are we going to need to be giving to those people in power, in authority, in order to allow communities to be able to do that?
I'd like to discuss that with Lena.
It's difficult not seeing how many people are actually on.
Well, we've got 20
All
on.
right, okay,
We've got Ronald Chaplin coming in first of all.
Okay.
Yeah, I suddenly
Hi, Ronald.
how to use the button, so that's great. Got to in first that way. Can I raise that issue of the cost of land? Because there are lots of communities that are being hit by two different problems. One of these is the Town and Country Planning Act 1959 that requires valuations to be based on effectively what the market could get for that land, and it's preventing communities from being able to buy land for doing rurally based projects, whether these relate to food, affordable housing, or community businesses or whatever. The other is the effect on the market now. Some land came up locally here. It's gone for a figure way over 30% higher than the asking price. It's just again making it harder and harder with this pressure coming from people who want to move from urban areas to rural areas. Often it is just to get away from COVID, but it's again hitting the opportunities for community groups that have heaps of exciting ideas learned from the experience of what was done in the way of resilience during COVID. I just wondered, Lena, what your thoughts were on both those issues, what government might be able to do to facilitate communities to have a preferential role that goes well beyond what the Land Reform Act went previously.
Hi, Roland. I think I took a message from you at DTAS the other day on the phone, I think, regarding this very subject. Absolutely. I mean, I think you're in a quick.
Ronald, can I ask you to mute your mic? Thank you, Ronald. I'm gonna let Lena get on with it and put you back into the body of the delegates. Thank you.
I think, Roland, that's a really interesting question. It's something when we're talking about place and how we identify place that really is. Roland's position is quite unique in that it's a private. As a private landowner there, and we've put him in touch with the Community Ownership Support Service. I think it probably would be easier if that's slightly different to what we were talking about here, and I think I would prefer if we could hear from Robert and Brian. I can maybe try and tie things back up together.
Okay, I'll bring Robert in, Robert Pembleton. Aha.
Hi, Robert.
Hi, Robert.
Hi. So just on the topic of things that thank you very much for letting me speak today, and thanks for everything today. On the topic of what needs to happen in order to make these community assets more accessible to people. I live in East Lothian, and recently, right around in my neighborhood, there was a building that went up. The Stony Hill Community Center, and there was a community, so I've lived here for a few years now. I was very interested in what was happening, what was going to happen with that building when I saw that it closed down. And apparently there was a community asset transfer proposal process that went through. Proposals came through. None of them were accepted by the council. The building was boarded up. and there's a large amount of uncertainty still about what's going to happen to the building. So I mean, I suppose ring in. I was someone involved in social entrepreneurship and trying to keep an eye on what was going to happen to this building, and still was not able to sort of have proper visibility over what happened, and didn't feel as if I was properly notified of anything that I could do to try to help use this like amazing community center building to help host social enterprises or something like that. So I would say, just based on that, we need more transparency. We need more ability for the common person to affect change and be part of policy making and decision making as relates to community assets and stuff like that.
I think
Okay. Robert, I'll put you back in. Thanks for that. I'll put you back in the audience.
Robert, I think you've brought up a really interesting thing there. And whilst I don't want to, a bit like Roland, I don't want to get into specific individual cases here with regard to sort of asset transfer. I think what Robert has touched on there is an important issue. I do know about Stony Hill because up until last year when I joined DTAS, I worked in East Lothian Council for 11 years. So I am aware, and what I would say is that as communities, do we have an opportunity to reflect on how quickly we worked within the resilience effort for COVID and actually teach local authorities or educate local authorities or elected members on how community can actually deliver, how different bodies and communities can actually deliver? I think there's a difference between the kind of nice and necessary element here. I think that there is an importance in looking at some of the really positive relationships that some community anchor organisations have with local authorities and learning about what makes those relationships work. What are the do's and what are the don'ts? Is it down to personality, or is it down to a method that actually works when speaking to local authorities and seeing communities rather than as this benevolent paternalism, which we often see in local authorities about communities being nice and doing nice things, rather than entities that can actually deliver a specific set of really important services within their place. Your thoughts?
Okay, thanks for that, Lena. I'm bringing Sophie Unwin back in. Once the screen comes up, of course, followed by Ailsa and then Brian. No. Sophie? Okay, I'll move on to Ailsa. Ailsa Higgins. Hello, Ailsa, how are you?
Good, I see you've been practicing your technical abilities, Roy.
You must be joking. Technical abilities are nil. Lena and I are in the same boat. Anyway, welcome, and you have the floor.
Thanks for having me. It's really interesting to hear what you have to say, Lena. I just had a question about the ability of kind of peri-urban communities to access community assets and anchors when they quite often, from one myself, have a great kind of sense of deindustrialism and people not really working in the community but maybe commuting to larger cities, and there's a sense of not knowing who your neighbours are, and particularly, and a lesser sense of coming together that remote and rural communities seem to be able to harness really easily and quickly because they know each other, they know the skills that people have, and there's maybe a greater sense of home and connectedness where the population is a bit smaller. So I'm just wondering if you had anything to say about how the slightly bigger but on the outskirts of bigger urban areas, towns, about the ability that they have to kind of harness their collective skills and come together. Thanks.
Okay, thanks for that, Ailsa.
I wish I had a magic wand. But it's a really interesting point that Ailsa's bringing up when we look at the number of new housing developments and new housing estates. You know, harping back to East Lothian, you know, the housing allocation requirement for the over 10 years when I was there was over 5 years when I was there was 10,000 houses. You know, how do we build a sense of community and a sense of place with people a very interesting point. Who's next?
I've got Brian Connolly would like to come back in.
Brian, yeah.
Yep.
Hi there. Thanks again for the opportunity. I suppose two very quick things. One, I suppose, an opportunity. And I think it's about recognizing how we better kind of attribute assets and actually look beyond what we think is the norms and look to kind of capture that in a more tangible way. So I know there was some early work done, say, for example, with SCRIG, or the Scottish Centre for Regional Inclusive Growth, with regards to developing a regional asset map. It was generated by Scottish Enterprise through the Scottish Government, and it was very much kind of business focused. But I think there's opportunities to kind of open that up and work with a wider range of partners in terms of actually saying what information do we have available, and ultimately raising that awareness of what's on our doorsteps. I think half the challenge with regards to better utilising our assets is having that knowledge of what exists in the first place. And then being able to bridge the gap and create that connection so people are aware of this is what's on their doorstep. The second question was a slightly different one, and it's taking the concept of an anchor in a slightly different perspective. So as mentioned, I work for Scottish Enterprise, and as an ASI, we have presence across Scotland. We have physical assets, we have land holdings in terms of commercial space, but also, again, land that's perhaps been reclaimed into the public sector for the purpose of, again, like whether it's rehabilitating the space or looking for ways that it can be kind of offered back out. But I think there's kind of then a question of what do you feel the role of anchor institutes in the broader context? So even say, for example, like the NHS, colleges, things to that effect, our wider public sector organisations as anchors could play in terms of pursuing or a better and fairer economy through, say, for example, community wealth building. Thanks very much.
Thanks for that, Brian. Just to let you know, I've got two questions come in that I'll go for next from Wendy Pring and Dan Rouse. But Lena, if you could go back to Brian on that one, please.
Well, I'm thinking about what Brian said, and I'm also looking at the question that Dan has put in. I think there's some similarity between both of them. Dan's asking about the basic skills needed amongst local people, and this probably comes in a bit to what Ailsa was saying as well. I don't have the magic wand about how to create community, but what is that spark within communities that actually makes people want to collaborate and work together to find local solutions? People have an innate want to work together. And I think what we need to be aware of is, particularly in some of these new estates or this peri-urban area that Ailsa was discussing, do we look at communities of geography, or do we look at communities of interest? Do we begin to pull people together on commonalities? How do we begin to bring people together? We have social media, we have resilience. Now, what we looked at over the resilience with COVID was the number of volunteers who had given up time to come and work within their local communities. Do we just say thanks very much now and ciao and thanks very much for your effort? Or do we try and harness some of that community social action that's been created as part of that resilience effort? How do we begin to build on that and support those volunteers to continue within their communities? There was an interesting concept about starting to look at some of the more Scandic models where volunteering is just seen now that people are working from home more. They're not doing that commute. They have elements of more time and are bedded within their communities. Do we look at employers actually supporting volunteering and civic volunteering within their own communities as a norm rather than as something nice to do on the fringes of what we do in our daily life? But do we actually see it as embedded within part of just being as a community? That would be an interesting concept.
Okay, thanks for that, Lena. Lena, do you see Wendy Pring's question?
I'm just going back up on the screen. This is all very interesting doing.
Yeah, it's amazing. I'll read it out in case anybody can't see it. I've set up a new venture and I'm looking to potentially purchase local land and create employment and CIC ultimately with the asset transfer going to the community, similar to People's Energy. How can LA, I take it that's local authorities, and the the social enterprise community work alongside business support, meaningful employment, and weave in community benefits to the structure of the area beyond the current CSR model, which can be lip service?
It might be interesting. Wendy, do you want to come in?
Wendy, bringing you in. I'm delighted to see you. When technology finally brings you onto our screen, of course, that's it. Hi, Wendy. Welcome.
Thank you. Hi, Lena. Hi, Roy. I have to say, I'm probably very similar to where Brian was coming from. I looked for a piece of land. I'm interested in developing a hydrogen fueling station and moving more into R&D. And I've spoken to, see, there's another question about community development. I live in New Cumnock, so there's a New Cumnock Development Trust. They're a very active group of people. There needs to be, I believe, a little bit more structure around it, but I think there's certainly commonalities between what they wish to do with the active travel and what I wish to do more in the business support, which will give sort of ongoing sustainable employment, as well as obviously the social enterprise element. And it just seems that you can either do one thing or another, because I've put in community interest company because I spent a lot of time over the last few months looking at the different business model options. And because of the scale and the type of work I want to do, I'm a chartered civil engineer. I was literally told to go set up a limited company, pay £20, and that was from quite senior people. And that was the only option given to me. And I feel that we're actually limited completely by the structures that are in place, as opposed to actually the well-being and the ability of people to pull it together. So it was just really to see if just nudging a little to see if that was something that could be changed or modified to actually make it easier for the ownership and the structure of these, the community basis of how you could share asset, but provide the asset transfer to a community, which is what People's Energy are doing. They've actually transferred 75% of their assets over back to their member. Well, in their instance, it's not the community, it's the members who are part of the actual scheme itself. So just need to see what anybody's view on it and see if it is something that could change or who you need to lobby to make it change.
Okay, thanks for that, Wendy. I'll put you back into the audience. Lena?
I'm not convinced that I have the answer specifically to that, but I think it's a really, really interesting model. You know, who do we lobby? I think our ability to influence the policymakers is really strong, particularly in Scotland. I think we need to be looking at new models all the time. I don't know if somebody else has an opinion specifically on it.
No. Would anybody like to come in on that? I know Sophie Unwin wants to come in, but she's having technical problems. Technically challenged. Well, in the meantime, till we get somebody back in, can I ask you a question, Elena, myself? Because I've got one prepared that was put in the oven last night and it's been baking overnight. It's ready to go. Reflect on community ownership and the strength of organisations anchored in place. What message do we want to get across to stakeholders, funders, local authorities and more about the past 6 months, and what do we want to result from that? Sophie, if you could hold on a minute while Lena comes back on that question I've just posed.
Well, I think actually it's quite prudent that Sophie's come in, because her model is probably quite a useful one to be looking at as we move into the future. A more collaborative model in looking with local authorities, Scottish Government and communities working together, and probably to some extent answers I'm sorry, I've just forgotten Wendy's answer as well, that perhaps we need to be looking at this more collaborative approach to community wealth building. Sophie, do you want to give an input?
Thanks. Yes,
I'm sure you do, Sophie. Welcome back, Sophie.
Sorry about my tech. I have been listening. I've just not been working out how to participate. But it's been really interesting to hear what everyone's been saying. I think just something that keeps coming up in my mind is something around local authorities and their budgets being cut, because ultimately, I think, everyone in this call, everything everyone's saying is really supportive of a community-based approach, and can show, massive benefits for this kind of approach, the approach that DTAS models and other organisations in this school are modelling, and one that we aspire to develop as well. But, for example, Glasgow City Council have just announced a huge series of cuts to organisations, including Citizens Advice Bureau across the city. And, these are really vital organisations for local people. And at the same time, I have kind of quite a lot of sympathy for local authorities that are facing year-on-year cuts. And I just think it's not something that can be taken out of this conversation. If we're saying community wealth building is the way we want to kind of go forward, if community assets are the way that deliver the real results, the results that we need for rebuilding from COVID, how can we, look for a change in that funding landscape? Because centralizing budgets and centralizing power is not going to make it possible to make those changes. I know that's a kind of maybe a provocative question, but I just feel like, personally, I've had so much support from Glasgow City Council, not just money, not very much money, actually, £13,000 money, but so much support in terms of being an enabling partner and really understanding the local approach we're taking. But if the system as a whole is top down, it's we're really trying to swim upstream. And if we're saying this is the approach we want to see, and we can see so many benefits for it, what might be the strategic interventions where we kind of call for I mean, that's maybe very ambitious, but call for some kind of reconfiguration in the way that local authorities are resourced overall.
Is that something that we're promoting to local authorities, is that it's not always about money. It doesn't always have to be about money. If we look back at what was it Robert was saying earlier in the conversation about, the asset in East Lothian, that it doesn't always have to be about money, but that in-kind support is sometimes the more important element. Again, that could cross as a common theme with what Wendy said, and what Ailsa was saying as well about regenerating or bringing together communities in these peri-urban areas as well. So do we have to make it more clear to local authorities that often the ask is not necessarily monetary based? The ask is sometimes about equality, and sometimes about relationships, and sometimes about in-kind support. I don't know.
Okay, Sophie, I'm going to return you to the. No, that was nice to see you again. I've now seen you more times than I think I've seen my wife this week. So I was absolutely delighted to see you. Now we have Brian coming back in with another observation or question.
That's it now. So we were actually looking at running a pilot project with DTAS, interestingly, on what we've called a community deal. Now, I think certainly in terms of kind of investment and recognising the direction of travel, and particularly with the Glasgow City deal, there was a desire to kind of bring investment in, look at kind of, rebooting the economy, the creation of innovation centres, road networks, etc., etc. But ultimately, and arguably, if you say, for example, we're in Shettleston, are you actually going to benefit as a consequence of that investment? Probably not, because ultimately there's so many issues that underpin the lack of opportunity and the lack of access to opportunities that are created, that this kind of investment, which in many ways is local authority driven, isn't really going to kind of tackle the problems there. And there's a need to go almost beyond the local authority and look at things in a more granular level. So certainly what we've been hoping to do is recognising our place as a national agency, and that this is probably new territory in terms of where we're coming at it from, but hoping to kind of, as has been articulated there, bring together the relevant players, the relevant parts, those have existing relationships within these spaces, and actually saying, listen, we need to kind of actually go bottom up, ask what are the problems, and then create solutions for those problems, rather than assume we can kind of create a one size fits all and that it's going to magically resolve things. So I think, as I say, at the early stages of developing what the concept's going to be, but hopeful, working, as I say, with partners like DTAS, be able to take something forward.
Thanks very much for that, Brian.
Absolutely. And the concept, as Brian spoke about there, about a community deal, is a really interesting one, where we look at that collaborative and equal effort across communities and bringing everyone in based on their own ability to be able to deliver their skills, their abilities, their input, and really creating that sense of place. I don't know, is there somebody else waiting to come in?
Well, I don't know. I've got no more questions here. We've only got 5 minutes left, folks. Is there another question we can bring in from anybody?
Do a little bit of advertising while we're here for those
We
who are not aware of
the exhibition centre awaits.
Ah, right. Okay.
I mean, at the moment, we would be looking in, under different circumstances, we'd be looking forward to a sumptuous lunch, of course. I've got Sarah Days coming in at the last minute. Sarah, how are you?
It's like listening to racehorse commentary.
It is like listening to racehorse, and it's Sarah Days coming in at the last minute. Hopefully she'll be
That
honest.
yes, that's good.
Yes, welcome, Sarah. How are you?
Good. We've got so many friends on this call. There's only 8, isn't there? I seem to know most of you actually. So I thought,
I've not seen you for ages. Anyway, you've got the floor. We've only got 3 minutes left, so you've got the floor.
Just to say, because we're talking about anchors, and I'm just about to look at an anchor draft anchor charter for North Ayrshire in my expert advisory capacity. So there's definitely something in that, in terms of, bringing the whole discussion that leads to the development of a charter, the principles by which organisations are going to work together to deliver on community wealth building. I think that's a really important thing to recognise when we're looking about the role of anchor institutions. That's my contribution.
Sarah, thanks very much. See you sometime, and back to delegates. And remember, Sarah, exhibition centre, please.
Yeah.
We're going to be, she's away. Is
She's
that
away.
going to be
No, she can see you.
it would be really interesting to see when that's coming out. Maybe she can put it in the chat.
So Kevin's just given me the 3-minute countdown and a link to the exhibition area. If people can click that when we're finished, we just appreciate that. I've got a 1-minute timer to put on, but we're not at that yet. However, my observation is this has been absolutely fascinating. Listen to you, Lena. Thank you very much for your input. Everybody, the questions, and it's great to see a bit of chat on. Such a completely different experience for me online. I like to see the whites of people's eyes, but no, it's been absolutely excellent. So thank you, everybody. And what we'll do is I'm going to basically set a timer here, and this is how I'm going to do it. I'll go like this, and then like this.
Oh, right, okay.
That's how we do it.
It's a bit futuristic, absolutely.
It is futuristic. Look at this. So, Lena, any closing comments?
No, other than thank you very much. Please stay in touch. If anybody has any other questions to ask specifically about asset transfer, it would be through the community ownership support service. Please keep, if anyone has anything else, feel free to contact. Really good to see you all. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much from me.
Okay, and from myself, thanks very much. I've really enjoyed it. A bit different from me, as I say. However, the one observation I would make is I think probably community is the way forward, but there's got to be a medium to long-term strategy and medium to long-term funding to support it. No in and out with odd grants, can't be that. There's got to be something faster than that and more certain than that.
Deal.
Okay, all the best, everybody. Straight over to the exhibition centre, quick as you can, major prizes. Oh my goodness, alarm off.